History has a pattern most people never see until it's too late. Empires don't announce their collapse. They don't send warning letters. They just enter what historians call the Endgame, and within 731 days, everything changes. 3 superpowers have already followed this exact trajectory, and right now, the signs are appearing again. In 1590, Spain controlled nearly half the world's gold and silver reserves. Their military dominated Europe. Their currency was accepted everywhere. 80 years later, they were bankrupt, broken, and irrelevant. They never recovered. Britain ruled the largest empire in human history in 1914, with the pound sterling as the global reserve currency. By 1954, the empire was gone, the currency had collapsed, and they'd become a junior partner to the United States. The Soviet Union looked invincible in 1989. 26 months later, it ceased to exist, not weakened, not diminished, gone. What connects these 3 collapses isn't coincidence, it's mathematics. Each superpower moved through 7 distinct stages of decline, and the final stage, the one where everything falls apart, happens shockingly fast. Historians track it, economists model it, but almost nobody recognizes it while it's happening because the pattern operates on a timeline that feels impossible until you see the data. Here's what makes this terrifying. The pattern is accelerating. Rome took 250 years to fall. China's Qing dynasty collapsed over 50 years. The British Empire unraveled across 3 decades. The Soviet Union disintegrated in under half a decade. Technology has compressed the timeline. Communication moves faster, trade moves faster, warfare moves faster, and collapse, when it comes, moves faster than any generation before could have imagined. So what are these 7 stages? And why does the final phase take exactly 731 days? Let me walk you through the pattern that destroyed 3 empires, because understanding it might be the only way to see what's coming next. Stage 1 is military overextension. This is where every superpower makes the same fatal mistake. They believe their dominance is permanent, so they expand their commitments beyond what their economy can actually sustain. Spain fought wars across Europe to maintain Habsburg dominance, while their silver mines funded endless campaigns. Britain maintained colonies on every continent, requiring a massive navy and army to defend territories that were becoming economically worthless. The Soviet Union tried to match American military spending while supporting communist regimes worldwide, devoting over 15% of GDP to defense when their economy was already stagnating. Paul Kennedy documented this in his research on great powers. Military overstretch isn't just expensive, it's a mathematical death sentence. When your security commitments exceed your resource base, decline becomes inevitable. You can't reverse it by trying harder because the fundamental equation is broken. Stage 2 is currency debasement. When military spending drains the treasury faster than the economy can replenish it, governments always make the same choice. They debase the currency. Spain started mixing copper into their silver coins, trying to stretch their diminishing resources. The result was predictable. Inflation exploded, and confidence in Spanish currency evaporated. Britain printed money to finance 2 world wars, destroying the pound's value and its status as the global reserve currency. The Soviet ruble became worthless outside the country as central planners printed currency to cover deficits they couldn't acknowledge. Currency debasement isn't just an economic policy. It's a signal that the government has lost control. Markets see it, trading partners see it, and once confidence breaks, it never fully returns. Stage 3 is the debt spiral. This is where the math becomes inescapable. Spain declared bankruptcy multiple times during the 16th and 17th centuries, despite controlling the world's largest gold and silver supplies. How do you go bankrupt when you literally own the money? You spend faster than you extract it. Britain emerged from World War II technically victorious but financially destroyed. owing massive debts to the United States, and forced to liquidate overseas investments. The Soviet Union accumulated hidden external debts throughout the 1980s, borrowing to maintain an unsustainable system while pretending everything was fine. The debt spiral has a unique characteristic. It feels manageable right up until the moment it isn't. You can roll over debt, restructure obligations, and issue new bonds to pay old ones, but only as long as creditors believe you'll eventually pay them back. When that belief cracks, the spiral accelerates into freefall. Stage 4 is loss of productive capacity. Here's where the pattern gets interesting. Spain never developed domestic manufacturing or agriculture because silver imports made it easier to just buy everything from other countries. When the silver ran out, they had nothing to fall back on. Britain's industrial leadership was challenged by Germany and the United States by 1900, and after 2 world wars, their factories were obsolete and their workforce depleted. The Soviet Union's heavy industry became increasingly inefficient throughout the 1980s, producing goods nobody wanted at costs that made no economic sense. Losing productive capacity isn't about factories closing. It's about forgetting how to make things that matter. Once that knowledge leaves, once those supply chains break, once those workers retire, you can't just rebuild it. The foundation is gone. Which brings us to the 3 final stages, the ones that happen fast: social decay, loss of reserve currency status, and total collapse. These stages don't take generations, they take months. Stage 5 is social decay. And this is where you can actually feel the empire dying from the inside. In Spain during the 1600s, the aristocracy stopped working entirely. Why bother when silver kept flowing in? The productive middle class vanished. Society split into idle wealthy elites and desperate poor masses with nothing in between. Crime exploded. Trust collapsed. Britain in the 1960s and 70s experienced something similar. The class system that had held society together for centuries fractured. Strikes paralyzed the country. The famous British work ethic disappeared. Brain drain accelerated as the best and brightest left for America. The social contract broke down because the empire could no longer deliver prosperity. Soviet society in the 1980s was rotting from within. Alcoholism reached epidemic levels. Life expectancy actually declined, something almost unheard of in peacetime. Cynicism and apathy replaced communist idealism. Nobody believed the propaganda anymore, but everyone pretended to. The entire system ran on lies that everyone knew were lies. What causes social decay? It's not moral failure, it's economic reality asserting itself. When productive work stops being rewarded, when corruption becomes the only path to success, when the system protects elites while crushing everyone else, social cohesion evaporates. People stop believing in the national project. They stop sacrificing for the common good. They focus purely on personal survival. You can't fix social decay with propaganda or patriotic appeals because the underlying economic reality makes those appeals ring hollow. And once a society decays past a certain point, once institutional trust is gone, you can't rebuild it. That generation is lost. Stage 6 happens faster than anyone expects. Loss of reserve currency status. The pound sterling was the world's reserve currency for over a century. Global trade was denominated in pounds. British banks financed international commerce. Then World War II happened, and within a decade, the pound was finished as a global currency. The dollar replaced it completely. Why does reserve currency status disappear so quickly? Because it's based entirely on confidence, and confidence is binary. Either the world trusts your currency or it doesn't. There's no middle ground. When Britain could no longer guarantee the pound's value, when their gold reserves were depleted and their economy was broken, international traders switched to dollars overnight. Not gradually, overnight. The Soviet ruble never achieved true reserve status. But its collapse within the communist bloc followed the same pattern. Once trading partners realized Soviet economic statistics were fabricated, once they understood the ruble had no real backing, they stopped accepting it. The entire system of communist trade relationships disintegrated within months. Losing reserve currency status creates a vicious cycle. International demand for your currency drops, so the value falls. As the value falls, imports become more expensive, driving inflation. Inflation further destroys confidence, accelerating the currency's decline. Governments try to stop the fall by raising interest rates, which crashes their domestic economy. They're trapped between currency collapse and economic depression. And here's what almost nobody understands. You can't get reserve currency status back once you lose it. Britain never recovered it. Spain never recovered it. Once the world moves on to a new reserve currency, that's permanent. The old power becomes just another country with just another currency that nobody particularly cares about. Stage 7 is total collapse. And this is where the timeline compresses to nothing. Spain's final collapse took about 20 years from dominant power to irrelevant. The British Empire's endgame from 1939 to 1947 was 8 years. Indian independence in 1947 marked the point where everyone knew the empire was finished. But the Soviet collapse is the most instructive because it happened in living memory with modern documentation. From Gorbachev's reforms in 1985 to complete dissolution in December 1991 was just 6 years. And most of that was slow deterioration. The actual collapse, the moment when the Soviet Union went from superpower to non-existent, took less than 900 days. Gorbachev introduced glasnost and perestroika trying to save the system. Instead, they exposed how broken everything was. Eastern European regimes fell in 1989. Baltic states declared independence in 1990. The August 1991 coup attempt failed, and within 4 months, the Soviet Union ceased to exist. Nobody predicted the speed. CIA analysts thought the USSR would last decades longer. Soviet leaders themselves didn't see it coming. Gorbachev genuinely believed he could reform communism and preserve the Union. He was wrong. Why do final collapses happen so fast? Because complex systems don't decline linearly. They maintain equilibrium through various stabilizing mechanisms until those mechanisms fail simultaneously. Then the entire structure comes apart at once. Niall Ferguson, the historian, calls this the phase transition from equilibrium to crisis. The system looks stable right up until the moment a small trigger causes catastrophic failure. It's not gradual. It's not predictable. It's sudden. The British pound losing reserve status wasn't a 40-year process. It happened in a few key moments between 1945 and 1949. The Soviet Union's dissolution wasn't a generation-long decline. It was 900 days of cascading failure after decades of apparent stability. This is the pattern. Slow accumulation of weaknesses that remain hidden or manageable, then rapid catastrophic collapse when the stabilizing mechanisms fail. And the terrifying part. The people living through the early stages never believe collapse is possible. Spanish aristocrats in 1640 couldn't imagine their empire ending. British leaders in 1938 believed the empire would last forever. Soviet officials in 1985 thought they were reforming and strengthening their system, not destroying it. The collapse always seems impossible until it's inevitable. And the gap between those two states is shorter than anyone realizes. So where does America sit in this pattern right now? That's the question everyone wants answered. And the honest assessment isn't comfortable. The United States is currently deep into stage 5, social decay, and showing clear signs of entering stage 6, loss of reserve currency status. Let me walk through the evidence methodically. Military overextension is undeniable. America maintains over 750 military bases in more than 80 countries. The defense budget exceeds $800 billion annually, more than the next 10 countries combined. Wars in Iraq and Afghanistan cost over $8 trillion, according to Brown University's Cost of War project. That's money borrowed, not paid for. Currency debasement is happening in real time. The Federal Reserve's balance sheet exploded from $900 billion in 2008 to over $8 trillion by 2022. Trillions of dollars created electronically and injected into the economy. The M2 money supply, the measure of dollars in circulation, increased by 40% in just 2 years during the pandemic. That's the modern equivalent of Spain mixing copper into silver coins. The debt spiral is accelerating beyond control. US national debt crossed $36 trillion in 2024. Annual deficits routinely exceed $1.5 trillion. Interest payments on the debt now consume over $1 trillion per year, more than defense spending. And interest rates are still relatively low historically. If rates rise significantly, debt service could consume 30% to 40% of all federal revenue. That's unsustainable mathematics. Loss of productive capacity is measurable. America's trade deficit has been negative for decades. The country imports far more than it exports. Manufacturing as a percentage of GDP has fallen from 28% in 1953 to under 11% today. Critical supply chains for everything from pharmaceuticals to semiconductors depend on foreign production, primarily China. The economy is increasingly financialized rather than productive, shuffling money rather than making things. Social decay is visible everywhere. Political polarization has reached levels not seen since the Civil War era. Trust in institutions, government, media, corporations has collapsed to historic lows. Life expectancy declined for 3 consecutive years pre-pandemic, something that hadn't happened since the Spanish flu. Drug overdose deaths exceed 100,000 annually. Homelessness in major cities has exploded. These aren't just statistics, they're symptoms of a society under severe stress. And stage 6, loss of reserve currency status, is beginning. It's not complete yet, but the cracks are forming. The BRICS nations launched their alternative payment system. Saudi Arabia is accepting yuan for oil sales, breaking the petrodollar monopoly that's existed since 1974. Central banks worldwide are diversifying away from dollar reserves into gold, yuan, and other assets. Global dollar reserves as a percentage of total reserves have fallen from 73% in 2001 to under 59% today. That trend is accelerating, not reversing. Now, here's what you need to understand about timing. Based on historical patterns, once stage 6 begins, stage 7 follows within 2 to 10 years, depending on the speed of technological and financial systems. Spain took about 20 years. Britain took 8 years from World War II to Indian independence. The Soviet Union took under 3 years from Eastern Europe falling to complete dissolution. Technology has accelerated everything. Information moves instantly. Capital moves at the speed of light. Currency crises that used to take months now take hours. The 2008 financial crisis went from contained subprime problem to global systemic meltdown in weeks. If America enters a true reserve currency crisis, the collapse phase could happen faster than any historical precedent. Possibly 731 days, or less far, on the trigger moment to a fundamentally transformed global system. What would that trigger look like? It could be a failed treasury auction where there aren't enough buyers for US government debt. It could be a major oil producer announcing they'll no longer accept dollars. It could be China dumping $1 trillion in treasuries during a geopolitical crisis. It could be a domestic political crisis that destroys international confidence in American stability. The specific trigger is unpredictable. What's predictable is that the system is fragile enough now that some trigger will eventually cause a cascading failure. Does this mean America is definitely doomed? Number: Patterns aren't guarantees. Britain avoided complete collapse. They declined from superpower to mid-tier power, but they didn't disappear. They adapted, accepted reduced status, and survived. America could do the same. Serious fiscal reform could stabilize the debt. Rebuilding productive capacity could reduce trade deficits. Restoring social cohesion could strengthen institutions. Maintaining technological leadership could preserve economic advantages. These things are theoretically possible, but they require political will, public sacrifice, and long-term thinking that current evidence suggests doesn't exist. Every declining power in history believed they were the exception. Spanish nobles thought their silver would never run out. British leaders believed the empire was eternal. Soviet officials thought communism would triumph. American exceptionalism is the same belief. The conviction that the rules don't apply, that decline happens to other countries, but never here. That belief is the most dangerous element because it prevents the difficult changes necessary to alter course. The pattern isn't destiny, it's a warning. But warnings only matter if someone listens and acts. Based on current trajectory and the mathematical realities of debt, deficits, and declining reserve status, America has perhaps 5 to 7 years before reaching a critical inflection point. After that, events could move very quickly. You're watching the late stages of a pattern that's destroyed every dominant power in history. The question isn't whether the pattern is real. History proves it is. The question is whether this time will be different. And the honest answer, based on evidence rather than hope, is probably not. The pattern has played out 3 times before with mathematical precision. Spain, Britain, and the Soviet Union all believed they were exceptions until the day they weren't. The 7 stages aren't theory, they're documented historical fact. And right now, America is exhibiting every warning sign that precedes the final collapse phase. The 731-day window isn't about predicting the exact future. It's about understanding that once stage 6 begins, once reserve currency status starts cracking, the endgame moves faster than any generation expects. You can't stop a pattern you refuse to see. History doesn't care about exceptionalism. It just repeats until someone finally learns the lesson. The clock is already running.